a couple of years back. And when he said to me, I'm going to talk about towing an iceberg from Antarctica to South Africa, I thought it must be April Fool's Day because I thought that sounded bonkers. And now, having seen your presentation before you're going to present it, I kind of understand what this is all about. So without further ado, we're just going to pop this on you. Let's put that on there. Thank you. Captain Nick Sloane.
Well, thank you, Mike, and Mr. President, members of the board, delegates. It is a real honor to be here today. I have to apologize about my dress code, but my luggage didn't arrive with me. So this morning I was found in the toilets downstairs, trying on Mike, where is he? I think he's still in the toilet. But Alan Brink's shirt and tie, that fitted, but his pants and underpants were around my ankle. So I took them back off and put my jeans on. Anyway, yeah, this is without prejudice, this story, because I see there's a lot of lawyers in the audience. So basically what happened is South Africa on the western coast has had a trend of downward rainfall figures for the last 15 years. And we entered a period of 3 years of actually quite severe drought. And we were looking at what are the options, you know, river water from the Zambezi, the Congo, we went to the Amazon. We took samples, they're full of invasive species, pathogens, E. coli, so you can't actually use that water, apart from the political challenges of taking someone else's river water. So 40 years ago, there was a story about a Saudi prince who actually wanted to get icebergs to Saudi Arabia, and it's a true story. And I went to meet the gentlemen that were part of that, and then we researched why it never happened and what were the gaps, and then we did a gap analysis. So these are the dams. You can see some of those pillars. I'm not sure if there's a pointer here. Yep. Okay. So these pillars are actually over 20 meters in height. So the dams are more than 66, 70 feet. This is the normal rainfall figure, is the medium. And this is 2015, 16, 17, and 18 was below that. 19, we actually the same as we are at 16. So we're still way below normal, but we did avoid day zero. And this was all of the holding capacities. Today, our main storage supply dam is at 49%, and we're halfway through winter. So this time last year, it was at 22%. So we were really facing it. And as I say, this is not just overnight, it's a downward trend of rainfall figures. And it's all the way through sub-Saharan Africa on the west coast. The impact of running out of water, so they had all of these water schemes to supply water by truck. Now, you can't supply 4.5 million people at watering holes. They could do about 200,000-300,000 per day per watering hole, but you're going to have hundreds of thousands that won't get water. You can survive without food for a few days, but you can't survive without water. So you're going to have anarchy. The background, well, yeah, many ideas surfaced what we could do. As I said, after the river waters, we went to glacial water. We actually went to Iceland, Norway, and Alaska. We got supplies, guaranteed supplies. We looked at chartering super tankers. So we could actually deliver water in about 4 months from the time that they said, please help us. But it would be expensive. It would be about $2 a liter by the time you've actually shipped it. And then over the equator, you'd have to treat it because obviously it's going to warm up and then cool down again. So you'd have to have chemists and verify that it's suitable for drinking. And you need clean tankers. So we approached on the basis of what can we do, who do we need to actually consult, bring into this team. We set up what we called the Southern Ice Forum. The first seminar that I hosted was in September 2017. A lot of academics, University of Cape Town, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, Water Research Commission. And at the end of it, I asked them all what they thought. And the best answer was maybe 10, 20 years, but not in my lifetime, was the general feeling. So that was disappointing, but we carried on. We put together the seminar, and we went up to Norway, France, Israel, and then all the South African academics, oceanographers, climatologists. And we started debating it in more detail. And the key to the whole thing was Professor Olaf Olheim from Norway and an engineer called Professor George McGon, a crazy, nutty Frenchman from Paris. So George McGon was consulted by the Saudi prince in 1978. He started a company called Iceberg International. Professor Olaf Olheim was then appointed by George McGon, and they went down, and he's actually done 25 expeditions onto Antarctica. Well, not Antarctica itself, but actually on tabular icebergs. Dr. Mike Shand is one of the top hydrologists and water engineers in the Cape. So we actually had to look at him about the infrastructure and how we're going to tie in. This has just happened a couple of months ago. We've been approached by the Woods Institute, MIT. Dr. Alan Condron, we gave him our presentation a year ago. They've run 10,000 simulations. They had 25 PhD candidates cross-examine it. And they came up and said, it can be done as well. So they've joined us. How much water Cape Town uses in a year? So we've put that in a block. It's called a tabular block, similar to an iceberg. But we can supply about 20% of Cape Town's water for a whole year from one iceberg. Now, if you think that we're on water rationings last year, so we're showering in buckets, using that water for toilets, you're on 40 litres per day per household. In the UK, the average household is about 500 litres a day. In California, when they had their droughts, they managed to reduce them to 350 litres a day per person. So the Californians were quite impressed that we got down to 40 litres per day per person for showering, cooking, washing, everything. We still shower in buckets, but we're up to 80 litres a day now. So the whole sort of approach has been a paradigm shift of how we treat water. Washing cars and doing your laundry on a day-to-day basis is something of the past. Now, we're talking about tabular icebergs, so on the top right. Tabular icebergs only come from Antarctica, the Southern Ocean. So all icebergs are formed on Antarctica themselves, and they all have the same profile. So they have a depth of about 230 meters below the water and 10 stories or 30 to 40 meters above the water. And they have a block coefficient of 1. They come off the Antarctic mainland, about 140,000 break off every year, and go into the Southern Oceans and melt. Arctic icebergs actually are formed in the water. They have a lot of saline salt inclusion. They look like a pear. So as they drift and they hit different currents, the temperature changes slightly, and even half a degree temperature variation on a northern iceberg will cause the faults of the saline fractures to fracture. The whole stability of the iceberg changes and it rolls over. So this is Prince Mohammed Al Fazal Al Saud, and he's the one who came up with the money, 1977. I think if we debated the subject right here, we could come up in 20 minutes or half an hour to say it's not going to get to Saudi Arabia. But they were funded, and he called it over the horizon funding. He said it's not going to happen tomorrow, but over the horizon in the future, maybe it will. And he stopped funding in 1983. They hosted it at Cambridge here in the UK. They had the Annals of Glaciology. So they had a big conference at Cambridge University. They actually shipped in an iceberg from a part of an iceberg, a 40-ton section of iceberg from Newfoundland, but they were in tabular. So iceberg research, as I said, Olaf has done over 25 expeditions onto tabular icebergs. So that's about 8 to 10 stories above the water. It's got 73 stories below the water, so 220 to 230 meter draft, twice the height of the shard. They all come off the Antarctic mainland. They migrate at 1 meter a year. So we're aiming for iceberg of about 1,000 meters in length, 500 meters in width, 230 meters draft. So roughly 100 to 120 million tons. It takes 1,000 years for that iceberg to actually migrate off the mainland before it fractures. This is Antarctica. Now all of the icebergs are around the coast. Once they fracture, they actually drift in an anti-clockwise direction, and they get caught in the Weddell Sea. That's the Weddell Sea up here somewhere, if you see it there. And this is the Larsen Peninsula. Now, we're particularly interested in this because about 67% of all of the icebergs that fracture every year come out of there into the circumpolar current. This is part of Olof's underwater, so he did underwater scans, and it's like a block of butter. It literally goes all the way down without any detours or contours until it hits the Southern Ocean, where you get wave erosion. But when you get wave erosion, then it collapses, but it goes maybe minus 20 to 40 meters, then it goes back out to the same block coefficient of 1. This is the target of what we're doing. This is roughly 100 million ton iceberg. So that's what we're hoping to get. Anywhere from 80 million to 120 million will take. This was just, so what they did, they went on board the icebergs and they actually did radiography throughout it to try and find faults and fractures. And they found that on the icebergs that actually come out of the Weddell Sea, which is about 90,000 of the icebergs, of the 140,000, very few have actually fractures. It takes them so long to come off the mainland of Antarctica that they actually come off and they're very solid. The core of an Antarctic iceberg is also about minus 20 degrees cooler than a northern iceberg, so they're far more solid. And actually, by the time they get to our location, they the survival of the fittest, so you're going to get the ones that are stronger. Now, this is what happens, is once they drift out of the Weddell Sea in the Larsen Peninsula, they start drifting north. And if you look at all of that, that's 67% of all the icebergs are coming into the southern Atlantic Ocean. Australia is further down, about 3 o'clock. And then the ones that you try and take to Chile would actually be on the wrong side of the Larsen Peninsula. So there's only about 10% of the icebergs that would be considered for Chile. These are actual live sightings. These are the currents around. So this is an iceberg called A22A. It broke off in 2002. Took 5 years to get to this location. And this location is actually north of what we're going to target. We're targeting Gough Island, which is in the Southern Ocean. It's 2,500 times bigger than what we're after. So this one's about 25 kilometers in width and 49 kilometers. And even right on the top right hand, that little fracture is actually twice the size of what we're after. So the icebergs do come this far north. We just have to find them. This is Gough Island, the mustard color. So this is 2/3 of the way from Antarctica to the Cape. So we're not going anywhere near Antarctica. It's roughly 40 to 42, 43 degrees south. It's actually where the Benguela current starts. So the Benguela current, the formation of the Benguela current is roughly in that gray circle. And that's the cold current that comes up past the Western Cape, all the way up to Namibia and stops near Angola. The other currents are the circumpolar currents, and then of course you get impacted. So this is what we did last year. We worked with the University of Bergen and the Norwegian Polar Institute, and for 3 months we did live tracking of icebergs around Gough Island. Now what you have here is, this is a thermal boundary. So the water temperatures goes from 8, 9, 10 degrees, and the red is 10 degrees, and all the icebergs seem to drift. And that seems to be the northern boundary. It's a thermal boundary of about 10 degrees. This is at 45 degrees south, so it's a little bit south of what we want, but there are the odd stragglers that go north of that. So here we tracked individual icebergs. So as I say, the core is about minus 20 degrees. So you're not going to change that much. In 10 degrees of water, you'll have a very little bit of melt on the boundary of the iceberg. Most of the melting will be from the sunshine on top, what you see. So what do? We're going to capture the iceberg. We're going to put almost like a modified fishnet around the back of the iceberg. It's going to be targeted to be around 70 to 90 meters deep, so it won't be anywhere near the surface. And basically that's going to be around the middle of near the center of gravity of the iceberg. That's the target. So it comes out the Weddell Sea into the Antarctic circumpolar current, and Gough Island is at that start of where the Benguela current starts. And all we have to do is the icebergs go from west to east naturally in the currents. We just have to move it to the left, which is north. Every iceberg has a natural oscillation of about 10 degrees to the left, and then about a week later it goes 10 degrees to the right. So we just want to keep it going to the left. And that's all we're going to do. We're not going to tow it faster than the current. We're just going to guide it to the left. So how do we do that? So we looked at the world's super tugs. So the ALPs, the Poshes, anything over 300-ton bollard pull. So we need 2 of them. We need about 400 tons bollard pull for 24 hours to alter course by 5 to 10 degrees of an iceberg. This is in scale. An iceberg is obviously in the Southern Ocean. They call it the Roaring Forties. A tug has a draft 6 to 8 meters. The propeller is at 6 meters, and it's bouncing all over the place. A super tanker has a bollard pull of about 400 tons. The propeller is at minus 17 meters. You ballast it down. It's a far more stable platform than a tug. So the tugs do the initial encapsulation. We hand it over to the super tankers. The super tankers now doing a maximum of half a knot. So you've got no directional stability. So then you put the tugs back on the bow of the tankers. The tankers will only need to use maximum power for about 15% of the time. Every time that the iceberg wants to oscillate back to the right, we just have to keep it going to the left. So you have enough fuel. It's an 80 to 90-day passage from Gough Island. The tugs will not have that bunker capacity, but super tankers do. So from a surveyor's perspective, we're going to be looking at thrust bearings, maybe modifying the pitch of the propeller, maybe the towage, a warranty survey. I know the TT Club would like to underwrite us. Now, we're coming to the Cape. This is our, sorry, but we're coming into the Cape and you've got a draft of 230 meters. False bay is maximum is about 60. It's also a very warm current. So we're going to bypass the Cape. This is back to the dynamics of the towage system. So this is the actual system they used off Newfoundland to actually manage to move icebergs between 500,000 tons and 1 million tons. So the biggest one they've ever moved was 1 million tons. But they actually have a net on the surface. As I say, that's a pear-shaped iceberg. They normally just move it out of the way of the Terra Nova project or any other offshore drilling. It's made of Dyneema. We're working with OTS, Offshore Trawl Supply in Norway. They have a coating that's extremely abrasive resistant and actually can take minus 20 to 30 degrees temperatures. So now we go back to the Wood Institute. Now they've been developing this program for Newfoundland icebergs coming out of the Newfoundland corridor and impacting. So they developed this drift analysis and they've modified that to actually look at our program. And they're going around the world. It uses 16 supercomputers. So we don't have access to that type of facility, but they ran 10,000 simulations and they found no reduction in our performance in 10,000 simulations. So that's when they decided they want to come on board. This is just some of the iceberg movements. So basically, because of the profile of a northern iceberg being like a pear shape, you have a whole different type of water levels that they take the profile of the iceberg. But in the Southern Ocean, when you're talking about tabular icebergs, there's only one block, so you don't have to worry about that profile. It's actually easier to simulate. The currents, or the Newfoundland currents, are far more complex and minuscule than the Southern Ocean currents. So this is actually a thermal imagery you can see around the Cape and all of the eddies that they've simulated, and actually they've tracked them. But they tracked them from the Norwegian Polar Institute. It has 2 satellites that provide most of the information. This is the Agulhas current, comes down the east coast from Mozambique around the Cape. That's the most powerful current in the world, so we don't want to hit that one. It's about 26 to 28 degrees, and it also goes off to Australia. So if we end up going to Australia, they're not getting an iceberg, I promise you. We'll send them some sandpaper for their cricket balls. So this is actually a live satellite photograph, and you see that the Agulhas current comes around the south of Cape into the Southern Ocean, but you have eddies that carry on towards St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Now, all of the warm currents have an anti-clockwise direction. They move very slowly at about half a knot as well. And then you get the cold currents coming up from the Benguela, have a clockwise circulation. So with live analysis, now when I first presented this, we didn't know this. We only found this out last year. with the University of Bergen and the University of Cape Town collaborating. So we were told that the complexity of the icebergs and the currents would never make it through there. But they've been modeling this, and we can actually alter course 10 degrees at a time and get the right part of the swirl. And because those swirls are moving at such a slow speed, we don't have time for the iceberg moving at an equally slow speed to actually make the right direction. But again, the target, that little red dot that you have over here, that's our target. You have a natural upwelling of ice-cold water from Antarctica. It's very nutrient-rich. So all of the fishermen and the international fish plunderers that do illegal fishing come down from Namibia, and they like to fish in that part of the southern African coast. So that's our target location. The water temperature is between 12 degrees on the surface and about 6 degrees at minus 50 meters. So this is a location. This is the summertime. The maximum temperature is 15. Here it's 14, but at minus 50 meters it's down to 6 degrees. So if you're coming from Gough Island at 10 degrees, you're going to move through this warmer water to get there. You'll mostly lose about 8% of the total volume of the iceberg. So now we're down to 92% of the iceberg. This is a 200-meter contour. So that's where we think we're going to run aground. And there's an old riverbed called the Berg River. It comes off the coast and into that target location. It's about 5 kilometers wide at that depth. And it's got a ridge of about 80 meters high. So in that valley is where we're going to target to run the iceberg aground. We've been monitoring shipping densities in the area, and there's hardly any shipping there. The higher density shipping is the fishing fleet from St. Helena Bay. We went and spoke to the fishermen and said, why don't you fish up there? And they said, there's nothing, that valley is dead. We don't fish there. So that's from a perfect answer for our environmental concerns. So now we've got, this is what you see on the surface, and that's the actual draft of the iceberg. So it hasn't come out that well in the presentation. So it's actually quite a deep draft. You can understand we're going to be 28 to 29 kilometers offshore when you run aground. Then we place a geotextile skirt around it. Initially, we were going to go to 200 meters to do it, but because of the rapid drop in temperature, we're only going to go the first 100 meters. And the geotextile skirt will allow fresh water out, but not salt water in. So it will create a natural boundary between the freezing ice-cold water and then the salt water. So in that 6 meters of skirt, it's going to go from 0 to about 6 to 7 degrees. And then outside the skirt, we'll go from 7 degrees to 12, 13 degrees. So within 200 meters of the iceberg, there'll be no change in the water temperature. So, you know, from impacting the local community, the water's cold anyway, you need a wetsuit to surf. You're not going to feel the difference. The thermodynamics, so basically the sunshine will create about 60 million liters of melt rate per day. And that's all on the top, or let's say 98% on the top. So within that skirt, you've almost stopped the natural melt underneath the surface of the water. These are the equations that have come from MIT. Number 4, obviously, the wave erosion. That's where all the energy and the damage will happen between Gough Island and the Cape. You can't go in the winter, the roaring 40s and the Cape winter storms. You know, you've got 15, 20 meter waves, so you don't want to be anywhere near there. But in summertime, you're down to 5 meters. So you're going to get wave erosion in that top 50 meters of the water column. Once we're on location, so now we've run aground in this valley, then we put a standard offshore mooring system. So we'll have a steel harness that goes around with piggyback anchors. And of course, as we're harvesting it, we're going to harvest it from the top. So we create a saucer. That's more like the saucer. This is artistic license. And then we're going to have shuttle tankers. So shuttle tankers will connect up, and we'll have between 4 and 5 to 6 a day, depending on how much water we want to send to the coast. We'll have 60 million liters of natural ice water, or iceberg water. And then with slurry machines, we'll have many machines, earth-moving equipment going round and round. and add another 100 million liters of slurry. And that slurry mix will be about 3 degrees to 4 degrees temperature into these product tankers that are obviously food quality product tankers. This is just more detail of actually how it's going to be. So now, of course, we get into the Cape Town infrastructure. It's very difficult to get water into the infrastructure. They start with dams, they go to reservoirs, they go through large diameter pipes into the municipalities, and then down through minor pipes to the village and your house. So to pump it back into that system is very difficult. So we looked at Saldanha Bay. Saldanha Bay, we can mostly give about 30 million liters a day. So that's 1 or 2 tankers a day. Cape Town, we can do about 30 million liters a day in the harbor. We found a way to get up the storm drains into the reservoir. But the bulk's going to go through an SPM. It's going to be a freshwater SPM and into the Melkhorst reservoir. So this will be a standard oil type, but we'll be using it for freshwater. The only problem with this is that during winter, we will lose about 3 to 4% of our operational capacity on the SPM. In the ports, we should be okay. So this is a type of, now because we still have what they call a disaster has been declared under the Disaster Management Act, we have a reduced environmental impact assessment that we have to carry out. So anything is called temporary. This is a temporary solution from 1 to 5 years. We can do the reduced EIA. And we're going to have high density polyethylene pipes to the SPM offshore. And then we come into the targeted place as a reservoir pump station. And this is Kuberg Nuclear Power Station. Now, nuclear power stations don't like tankers offshore, but this was a water tanker. But also, we can actually enhance the capacity and capability of the nuclear power station by giving it colder water than the ambient water that they have their intakes. So we can increase the efficiency of the nuclear power station by up to 20% by having ice cold water as a heat exchanger. So far, they haven't bought into that. So we're not going to pursue that too much further. So now we go into the reservoir. So of course the water's coming ashore. Now it's about 7 to 8 degrees. And the normal water coming from the reservoirs, from the dams, is about 12 degrees. So you're going to have that mix will be in the reservoir, and also that will add local minerals into the mix as well. So this iceberg water is about 150 to 200,000 years old. So no one actually quite understands or knows what type of minerals you're going to get. The economic rationale. So obviously the city of Cape Town wanted to look at desalination. So we looked at from 1928 all the way through to 2015, the historical rainfall patterns. In the 70s, we had a 300-year drought. It was the lowest rainfall figure since Jan van Riebeck arrived and started measuring water. But unfortunately, less than 50 years later, we have a worse drought. So they said, okay, let's extrapolate that and look forward and see what cycle we're going to use. How many years out of the next 20 do we actually need water? So this was a consulting engineering firm. They said 60% we need maybe 2 years or less. 25% was 3 to 5. So if you're going to be building something like a desalination plant that has a 20-year payback on the capex, you need at least 50% guarantee that you're going to use it for 10 years. So if you had 10 years, you have 1% chance. So now you look at the large desalination plant, costs you 10 billion rand, or let's say almost $2 billion. So the exchange rate's changed a bit since last year. But $2 billion you're going to put up front before you get 1 liter of water. It takes you 20 years to pay it off. Australia had a scenario in Adelaide where they built this, and before they finished it with all the licensing and the actual construction, it was 3.5 years later, they never switched it on. So it's never been switched on today. So you've got a white elephant. We have white icebergs, cost you about 220 million per iceberg. Let's say the second year, you can bring it down to about 190 million because you're using the same SPM, the same geotextile skirt, same hardware. So that's about 2 cents of a liter. You're going to reduce the price in year 2. But we've used that same price as 220 million for every iceberg, just to give you the worst case scenarios. So it's going to take almost 10 years for desalination prices to come down to even match an iceberg. But environmentally, 1 liter of desalination gives you 4 liters of brine. So from a toxicology point of view, if you have 200 million liters a day, that's 1 million liters of brine. And in the Persian Gulf, they found that the fish habitats and things have dramatically changed in the last 15, 20 years. If you look at Irani, you know, your president, he's half the man he used to be because of the lack of fish. So basically, the iceberg wins over desalination. In South Africa, we have a hell of a problem and challenge with power supply and electricity. So we haven't even had any inflation in the electricity supply price for these calculations. But if you took that into effect where Eskom doubles every 5 years, you'll never catch up with the iceberg. So what are the risks and the benefits? So we have a large-scale supply, up to 20% of the city's requirements. So the city itself might not need water next year, but the farmers have been told that there's no water from the dams. So last year, 30,000 people in the agricultural community lost their jobs, and they're not planting crops. There was a rapid demise in the sheep stock, the livestock. So basically, if we deliver this to the city of Cape Town, then the national government can offset water from the dams to the farming community. So the Department of Agriculture is highly interested in this. The risks, well, unproven supply method, it works in simulation. Obviously, you're still working in the roaring 40s when you're going to capture it. So that would be your critical window, but you have 7 days between fronts in November, December. So that should be enough to actually do the capture, and then maybe wait for the next window to transfer it to the supertanker. Technical and cost uncertainty, environmental authorization, and obviously tying into local infrastructure is a challenge. But the benefits, we think, far outweigh. I mean, sooner or later, there's 2,000 billion tons of water melting in the Southern Ocean every year. That's enough water for the whole of mankind, and it's melting. So if you want to create a race to the ice, there's three places on Earth that you can take the tabular iceberg. There's the Western Cape, Namibia, Angola, Western Australia, Fremantle, Perth, and Western Chile, Santiago. So those are the 3 places that you can do it, where the model says, but the number one, where all the factors are in your favor, is actually the Benguela Current to Cape Town. So that's mostly the least risk, and I think TC agree. So medical usage. Last May I was in Hungary, and I met a team of oncologists. I didn't know much about them before, but they sent me a whole lot of stuff. Now they're looking at deuterium depleted water. So in the northern hemisphere, you have a lot more carbon pollution north of the equator because of landmass, industrialization. So they need to use deuterium depleted water to use for chemotherapy to get the absorption of the chemo into your organs, for your targeted organs. And if you use Antarctic water, we're down to 90 parts per million, which is 40% less than we've achieved so far. It increases the survival rate for pancreatic cancer by 600%. So it's just on the side. It's going to happen one day. Conclusions: glacial bulk water is there. We can do it in 4 to 5 months. So we can avoid day 0, but you're going to need a lot of tankers to keep the supply chain going. And it's going to be about 2 Rand a litre. River bulk water, environmentally unacceptable. You still have to treat it. So it's going to cost you quite a bit to get there. You're going to have political challenges in Zambezi, the Congo, Angola. Icebergs, we need about 6 months preparation, 3 months on passage. So it's 9 months to a year. At the moment, we're targeting October to December of 2020 to capture the first one. So March 2021. There will be, maybe we'll have the next conference in 2021, March in Cape Town, and we'll provide the ice. There are a lot of challenges, but we've got an incredible team of scientists and people around the world. And actually, you know, the last seminar we had was in September last year. And from November, when they said, not in my lifetime, Not one person said it cannot happen in the next 5 years, and 70% in 3 years. So we'll send around the hats shortly. Thank you.
Nick, I'm my speechless, I have to say, but wow. I suspect there might be some questions.
The warranty surveyor.
Okay, let's get that up to the microphone.
Well, thank you very much. That was amazing.